today, isn't it?
It is. We're diving into the source material, the documents that lay out the specific and pretty significant criticisms he faced during those 3 years.
And there's serious criticisms. We're talking authoritarianism, economic failures, human rights abuses.
Exactly. And critics argue these things didn't just happen. They directly contributed to the system's collapse and ultimately to his assassination in 1975.
So we're looking past that, that glorious liberation story to really get at the tension at the heart of his rule. And for you, the listener, this is so important because these specific allegations.
The one-party state, the corruption.
Yeah, they're still being used today. They're being used to justify or to challenge political power in Bangladesh right now.
And we should be fair here. It's crucial to get the counter-argument on the table right away.
Okay.
His supporters will maintain that a lot of these criticisms are exaggerated, blown up by political opposition.
Or that the failures are just unavoidable.
Yeah.
How do you rebuild a nation that's been completely ravaged by war and genocide?
Precisely. So our focus is on weighing those immense challenges against the documented policy failures.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately. Let's start with the biggest political shock of his presidency. A huge constitutional change that happened just months before he was killed.
That was the establishment of Baksal,
Baksal.
the Bangladesh Krishak Shramik Awami League. It happened in early 1975. And what he did was he essentially amended the Constitution to declare a single-party state.
A single-party state. So all other political parties were?
Banned, formally banned. And at the same time, he centralized immense, absolute power in his own hands as president.
Now, hold on. What was the official justification for that? To go from fighting for democracy to abandoning it so completely, what was their reasoning?
Well, the government's argument was that it was a measure of last resort. They claimed that only a unified, centralized system could stabilize a nation that was, teetering on the brink of anarchy.
So they were trying to combat internal sabotage, post-war chaos.
All of it. But of course, critics immediately dismissed that. They saw it as a transparent, cynical power grab.
It certainly reads like a definitive shift to dictatorship. I know experts at the time were drawing parallels to, Soviet-style systems.
They were, and what's so fascinating is how short-lived it was. This whole structure only lasted a few months, but the symbolic impact was just massive.
It signaled a complete breakdown of democratic faith.
Exactly. And the power grab wasn't just about controlling political parties. The sources also detail how they simultaneously suppressed information and civil liberties.
What were the specifics of that, the media crackdown?
The government shut down multiple newspapers.
Yeah.
They just drastically restricted public discourse.
Wow.
Only 4 state-approved papers were allowed to stay open. So you can imagine that effectively silenced any independent or critical voices.
And what happened to journalists who kept reporting critically?
The historical record is pretty clear. They faced threats, even detention, and opposition leaders were subject to aggressive intimidation, sometimes outright arrest. The state was choking off all dissent.
It seems like that atmosphere of control was, designed to squash dissent because the economic situation had become so dire.
It was.
Which brings us to the next section. It's hard to imagine a new nation needing more help, yet the sources point to systemic corruption that seemed to just thrive under his leadership.
And this failure was something people could feel. It was visceral. Mujib himself, in his own speeches, sometimes admitted that corruption was a problem.
Okay, so he acknowledged it.
He did. But critics ask the crucial question. If you know it's a problem, why did you take such limited and, frankly, ineffective action against your own party?
That's the challenge, right? If the corruption was so widespread and it involved his own family, his closest associates, why didn't he use the immense power he already had to prosecute his own people?
The documentation points towards, something that looks a lot like complicity. The core allegation is that Awami League officials were engaged in widespread graft, hoarding, and plunder of national resources.
All while the population was suffering from severe shortages.
Exactly. And this wasn't abstract. The sources highlight specific examples of nepotism that bring the scandal right to his doorstep.
Can we bring those to life? Who are we talking about?
Certainly. Take his nephew, Sheikh Fazlul Hakmani. He was alleged to have built a media and financial empire almost overnight.
Through government favors?
Government favors, property seizures, you name it. Then there were serious allegations involving Mujib's own brother in things like massive smuggling operations.
So those closest to the top are the ones allegedly benefiting the most.
Precisely. And it went beyond family. Look at his associates like Ghazi Golden Mostaf, who was the head of the Red Cross.
The Red Cross.
He faced serious charges of misappropriation. We're talking about allegedly diverting vital humanitarian aid. When the public sees that happening, trust in the government just evaporates.
And the real economic damage was happening through this large-scale smuggling, right? Facilitated by these same party loyalists.
The economic leakage was catastrophic. Estimates suggest billions of taka worth of vital goods.
Like what?
Jute, which was the country's main export. And even more crucially, food grains. They were being illegally moved across the border.
And this black market, allegedly protected by party members, it created artificial scarcity.
It did. It worsened the economic instability that was already plaguing the country. For the average person, it just meant essential food became unaffordable or just, poof, vanished from the market.
And all of this, the corruption, the mismanagement, the smuggling, it all culminates in the single greatest human tragedy of his rule.
The 1974 famine.
A monumental disaster.
It was. The documented estimates are up to 1.5 million deaths. And while severe floods definitely made it worse.
The core failure, according to critics, was internal.
Yes. Widespread corruption in relief distribution, government mismanagement, and the continued smuggling of desperately needed food aid.
So aid that was meant to save lives was allegedly being stolen and sold by the very officials supposed to be distributing it.
That's the allegation. This wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a crisis made infinitely worse by governmental policy failures.
This is where we have to bring in the analysis of Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, right?
You do. Because he characterized the crisis not just as a lack of food, although that was a factor.
Or just an entitlement failure.
Exactly. Entitlement failure.
That sounds technical. Break that down for us. What does that actually mean in this context?
What it means, simply, is that the problem wasn't just that there wasn't enough food in the country. It was a breakdown in the system for getting food to people.
The logistics, the markets.
The jobs, the purchasing power, the access to clean aid, all the things that entitle you to food in a functioning economy. They collapsed. Policy failures created conditions where people just lost their ability to afford or acquire food.
So the famine fueled widespread unrest, deep social dissent.
Inevitably.
Which leads to the next question. As the government was failing to feed its people, how did it enforce its will and suppress all that opposition?
And that is where the most severe human rights criticisms come in. They center on a group called the Jatiya Rakhi Bahini, the JRB.
This was a paramilitary unit.
Yes, created by the government and fiercely loyal to Mujib personally.
And the documentation points to pretty severe abuses by them. What specifically are they accused of?
The record details widespread accusations of extrajudicial killings, systematic torture, enforced disappearances, basically the brutal suppression of any and all dissent.
Critics often called them a personal militia.
They did. Because they seemed to operate with impunity, completely outside the normal legal framework. They were particularly active in rural areas, suppressing what the government called Maoist or anti-state elements.
And beyond this, this internal mechanism of control, the sources also point to broader policy critiques.
Yes, and we need to touch on two that are often glossed over. First, the accusations about his pro-India policies.
Okay.
Critics argued that Mujib's government made Bangladesh overly dependent on India, especially on trade and regional policy. This led opponents with nationalist feelings to label the new country a tributary state.
Undermining the very sovereignty they'd just fought for.
Right. And the second point, which ties right back to the economy, was the persistent administrative inefficiency.
A new nation needs a functioning civil service, but the criticism is that they failed to clean house.
A catastrophic failure. The regime largely retained corrupt, often compromised bureaucrats from the Pakistani era.
So the system was already broken.
It was already deeply embedded with corruption. These officials were unwilling or just ill-equipped to manage a new, socialist-leaning economy trying to recover from war. The new wine was poured into old, flawed containers. It made effective governance almost impossible.
This brings up a really important question. How were all these critical narratives, which ended in his government's collapse, how were they captured and then used politically after 1975?
Well, the process of documenting it all began relatively soon after the coup. Important books and journalism helped cement these criticisms in the historical record.
Like what?
You have works like Anthony Mascarina's Bangladesh, A Legacy of Blood from 1986, or Mudud Ahmed's era of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman from 1983, plus crucial investigative reports from journalists like Lawrence Lifschultz.
And that documented record became instant political ammunition for the regimes that followed him, didn't it?
Absolutely. The military governments and opposition parties that took power after 1975, especially the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, They actively amplified these failures.
Bacchusal, the famine, the corruption.
They used them as justification for the coup, for their own rule. And conversely, the Awami League, when they've been in power, has historically worked to suppress or challenge any public discussion of these criticisms.
It's just striking that even today, questioning his title as father of the nation, or at least how he ruled, is still a political flashpoint. This is not settled history.
Not at all. It's proof that the historical reckoning is still very much ongoing.
So what does this all mean? The sources paint a picture of a leader who was, without a doubt, the architect of independence, but who, in his tragically short time in power, became defined by the systemic failures of that rule. The accusations suggest he just failed to make the transition from a revolutionary leader to an effective, accountable administrator.
And that's the core tension history is still trying to resolve.
Yeah.
Mujib was killed in a coup, which means none of these accusations of corruption or abuse were ever formally settled. They were never prosecuted.
Right.
So the debate now is, how should history weigh the immense undeniable challenge of post-war nation building against these documented policy failures?
Like the failures that made the 1974 famine so much worse.
Or the intensely polarizing political decision to create the back-to-all one-party state?
It's a massive moral and political balancing act. We've explored the specifics of these allegations, and we're left asking, does the heroism of the liberator override the catastrophic failures of the administrator?
A tough question.
It is. So for you to consider, when a government's foundational policies, like creating a one-party state or failing to handle relief aid during a famine, are documented as failures by historians and journalists,